G'day everyone, and welcome to episode 34 of the Pressure Point podcast. I'm joined as always by my co-host Quinn DeLuca. How you going, mate?
Very good, mate. Very good. I'm pretty happy at the moment. The Tigers are back on the winners list to beat the Saints in the semi and on to the prelims. So another exciting year ahead, hopefully.
That's it. Yeah, you would be happy. First semi-final win in nearly 20 years, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's the first one I've ever seen. So it was something different, but it was good. It was good to see us get over the line, get another game under the belt for a few of the blokes that have missed a lot of the season. It was good. Yeah,
absolutely. And sets up a big prelim, another prelim for the Tigers. So exciting week for you.
Very.
Yeah, but this episode's even more exciting. We've got former Hawthorn great Gary Buckenara. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you, boys.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. Geez, mate, having a look at your resume: 4-time Premiership player, 3-time All-Australian, Hawthorn Team of the Century, and Hawthorn Hall of Fame. It's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, look, it's always nice to look back on those things. At the time, you're just trying to do the best you can as a player and contribute to the team. And I was very fortunate to be a part of a wonderful era at Hawthorn, and created so many wonderful memories.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll strip it right back to the start. So we'll go back to your early footy days. So talk to us about your footy growing up as a kid and coming through the junior ranks.
Yeah, look, I'm a Perth boy, so born in Western Australia in Perth, and so grew up over there. And obviously, footy and cricket were a big part of growing up. To be honest, I was probably more interested in cricket than in footy. Played both sports, of course, and spent many hours down the parks kicking footy after school with mates and having shots for goals and little one-on-ones, 2-on-2s, 3-on-3 little games, etc. And in cricket season, it was down to the nets and doing that until it was dark, until we had to go home. So sport was always a big part of my life, and loved that. And as it grew, cricket initially was really good for me. I played first grade district cricket for a club called Scarborough Cricket Club when I was 17 years of age, and played with the likes of Dennis Lilly, Rod Marsh, Tom Hogan, Greg Shippard, Robbie Langer, Derek Chadwick, Sam Gannon, Mick Malone. So it was a pretty good team that I played with, and that's where the cricket sort of, for me, as a 17-year-old, was first and foremost. And footy, I played for fun. I played amateurs from 17 years of age until 21 years of age. So I played 4 years of E-grade amateurs with my mates.
Yeah, awesome. And then, so obviously, you said you're from WA. So what was the process of getting picked up by the Hawks? Was Hawthorn sort of had a zone with WA? How did that all work back then?
Well, back in the 80s, each club had 2 Form 4s, they called them, per year to use on interstate players to come and play in the VFL. And from E-grade amateurs, I was asked to go to my allocated waffle club, which was Subiaco, because I lived in their zone, so I could only play for Subiaco. And went there in 1979, and within, at the start of the season, I did pre-season, and then I was selected in the first game, and within 6 games, I was selected in the state squad to play against South Australia. And by about halfway through the year, every VFL club back then had approached me to sign a Form 4 with them. So things happened pretty quickly, and that's where the footy sort of took over momentum from my cricket.
Yeah, right. I mean, that just, I guess, speaks wonders for the talent you must have had at such a young age. And you did say that you moved over and went to the Hawks at the age of 24, and I've recently just had my 24th birthday, so you've given me a fair bit of hope that I still might be able to get picked up. Aside from that, well, before we get into your VFL career, tell us what it was like playing State of Origin footy, because we know that you did tend to give the Vics a fair bit of trouble back then with some of the games you played. What was that like?
Yeah, look, WA was so passionate about, the footballers it produced, I guess, and back in the days in the 80s and 70s and 60s, a lot of WA players came and played in the VFL, and much to the disappointment of WA fans, a lot of them came back and represented Victoria and played state footy against WA, and so when State of Origin came to the fore, WA people, because there was no national competition back in the until 1987, WA people just loved those State of Origin games where all the WA players came back and represented WA, and we held our own and actually had some great wins over Victoria, and playing in those games was just amazing because the pace of the game. There wasn't a lot of tactics. It was basically the best go out and play against the best, and the ball movement was so quick, the skills were so good, and they were great games to be a part of.
Yeah, State of Origin was obviously a very popular game. I know it was played during the week, and I have seen footage of some of the crowds you guys used to draw midweek. It didn't look like many people were getting up to a lot of work back then, but
yeah, a lot of lunches.
Exactly, yeah, exactly right. A lot of lunch breaks, but another thing as well, you were known for your high flying grabs, and being a short fella myself, I don't get up too high. Was that something you worked on, or were you always just naturally gifted at sort of getting pretty high up?
Look, as kids, it was all part of the things we used to do down the park. We used to, go for the speckies, and all of us used to take turns in being the mug that used to, have the ball kicked up against him, and you'd bend down and let all the blokes jump on your back and take speckies. So I guess that's where, I learned the craft of jumping on somebody's back, and you've got to have a bit of a leap to be able to do it. So, yeah, I always had a pretty good leap, and, those sort of skill sets that we used to learn down the park, including kicking for goals, understanding your own kicking style, and learning to take speckies, to keep your eye on the ball, even though you got a big hoist up, on somebody's back. It was all a part of the learning process, and that's where I probably learned, to jump on somebody's back.
I definitely held you in good stead. And onto the Hawks, the Hawks played in 8 grand finals in 9 years. They won 5 of them, and you were a 4-time premiership player yourself. Without being humble, is that the most dominant AFL VFL side we've ever seen?
Look, all the eras are different. I think it's harder to build a list. You have to be so good with list management nowadays, given that we have a draft, and even today the draft is so compromised with now, academy players and NGAs, etc. So, it is harder to build teams, whereas back in the 80s, 70s, probably the better off teams in the AFL and the teams up the top of the ladder were able to attract the best interstate players and build better lists than other clubs. But to have a dominant era like that, I don't care whatever era you played in, it's hard to come up year after year after year, because you're always the team people are hunting to beat when you've won a premiership or you've been a side like Hawthorn was, and that creates its own pressure, as it does today for teams. And look, it was a wonderful era, and I think our Hawthorn side of the 80s would stand up in any era. Yeah,
absolutely. That team, it was a lot before me and Quinn's time, but geez, we've seen some footage of that, and it just looks like an unbelievable team and unbelievable era to play in. And I think it's unrivaled in my opinion. But you've probably been asked this a lot of times, but what was it like playing with the great Dermot Brereton? I'm sure there are plenty of funny stories about him on and off the field.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of the stuff off the field. You know, he was a character, and what you see with Dermot's what you get. You know, and he had a big ego, but that was one of the great things at Hawthorn. You know, that ego made him a great player. But you know, Allan Jeans was always saying to the players, you know, there were some great players and some big egos, etc., in that side, but he always demanded the egos were taken off before, you know, as you walk through the doors, take your ego off, hang it on the coat hanger, and then when you leave and train and pick up your ego and on you go. But don't bring it to the footy club when you're training, playing, etc. Because it's about the team, not about the individual. So he managed that very well, and Dermot, to his credit, was just a wonderful teammate and fantastic to play alongside of, you know, and you know, my opponents always used to know Dermot was around, you know, so they'd always maybe having a sneaking look. And, you know, it was the same with Lee Matthews. Lee Matthews used to play behind me, and my opponents knew Lee Matthews was behind them as well. So maybe that might have gained you a metre on your opponent every now and then. So it was nice to have those players that could make that real big physical impact when required.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you still keep in touch with a lot of your former teammates from back then?
Yeah, look, we've been very fortunate. I think, again, in the eras, our era was far different. You know, we all worked, and we used to come to training after work and spend a lot of time together. After games, we used to go, you know, back to the social club for, you know, some meals and get-togethers, and you know, we stayed close, and then we'd probably go to someone's place and the kids would all sleep on the beds, and we'd have a few beers and have some fun together. So that's basically what we did right throughout that era, and we created great friendships for life. Whereas I think today's modern players, it's more about a job. They're full-time footballers, that's their occupation, and I think there's a period of time where they want to get away from it because they spend so much time together as sort of colleagues, really, and come together on a Saturday to play. So I don't think there's going to be, you know, the great mateships in the modern footy that there was back in the 60s, 70s and 80s and even into the 90s.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's just, as you said, they're colleagues now. It's their full-time profession, and yeah, that sort of balance that they have, it is definitely a lot different. But another question that you've probably been asked a million times as well is that the famous 1987 prelim final. Yeah. Run us through that whole experience, you know, from the kick after the siren, you know, Jim Steins ran through the mark. It's obviously, you know, one of the game's most famous moments. You know, what was that whole experience like?
Well, the day was a weird day because we kicked against the wind for 3 quarters. You know, I can remember clearly Melbourne going with the wind in the first quarter, and we were looking forward to kicking with the wind in the second. And at quarter time, basically, the wind just turned straight around and blew down the other end. So for the first half, we kicked against a really strong breeze, and we were always behind all day. And to be honest, before my kick, Melbourne had, I reckon, 3 or 4 chances to sew the game up and just kept missing. And we just kept kicking at a goal, just to give us some hope, and got to the point where, you know, that final kick with 25 seconds or 15 seconds on the clock, where Michael Tuck kicked it out and Swabby marked it handball to Langford, and Langford kicks it to me and I get a free kick. The siren had gone just after I got pushed in the back, but I didn't hear it. And of course, I don't think the umpire heard it, nor did Jim Steins, etc. And, you know, Dipper claims credit for dragging Steinsy through the mark, you know, trying to create a loose man in the pocket, and Steinsy saw him and ran through the mark, gave 15 metres away. Took me to around about 35, 40 metres out, and history says that I kicked the goal. And look, it's one of those childhood dreams, you know, down those park all the time when it was dark and you had to go home for tea. You'd have that final one kick to go home, and it'd be to win a grand final with that one kick for goal, and doing it in a preliminary final to get your side into a grand final was an amazing experience.
Obviously, no one will know now, but did you have that kick from outside 50 before they gave away the 15-metre penalty? Would you have kicked it?
Well, I always say to Melbourne supporters I would have, because it makes them feel a bit better. But I was always very confident in my kicking ability. If you look at the kick, it went through. I think it hit a Melbourne supporter in the back of the head on his way out of the stadium about 30 rows back. So I reckon I may have made it. So, I was always confident in my ability to kick the goal, but no one will actually know that. The history shows that I kicked it from 40 metres out, and it went straight through.
Well, you'll take that any day of the week. Obviously, in today's game, it's now a 50-metre penalty. It's a little bit further. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's a little bit harsh, and it should maybe go back to the 15-metre penalty that it used to be?
Well, it got to the point with the 15-metre penalty that clubs were exploiting it, just happy to give away a 15-metre penalty and scrag the player who sort of had a mark, or to stop them being able to move the ball quickly. So that's why the 50-metre penalty came in, because clubs were quite prepared to give away a 15-metre penalty, especially, say, from the centre, so that people could get back and block it up, and you could waste a bit of time for the ball going forward. So 50 metres came in, whether there's a happy medium of 25, 30 metres, but I don't know. I think the 50-metre rule can be a bit. I don't like it when they give it for a player encroaching in their space. I think that's just too harsh, especially when it has no impact on the player itself with the footy and how quickly he can move it on, etc. So if I was going to change something, I'd just get rid of that, because I just don't think that's a fair rule at all. It's too big a penalty, especially if it's done in the centre circle and the player then goes to about 25 metres out and has an easy shot on goal. The penalty is too harsh for the crime, so get rid of it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. I'm a big believer in you should probably leave the game alone, because it was perfect the way it was. And when they brought in rules like that, I think it probably changes it a little bit. But I agree with you there. I'm more than happy to change that one. But we'll move on to Allan Jeans. Obviously, he was a coach of yours, and from the outside, we can only see and hear so much. I mean, obviously, he was a great coach, a great motivator. Myself, before my junior games, I used to watch the little motivational speech he had on YouTube, just to get me fired up. But what was he like behind the cameras, in between the four walls of the club?
Yeah, look, he came across as very dour, especially in his interviews on TV, and he gave nothing away. But look, he had a great sense of humour. He loved his players. And he got to know his players, what got the best out of them. And I think that's a modern day trait that's really important in today's footy, that coaches are more man managers now, and they get to know their players and what brings the best out of them. And Allan was probably before his time in doing that. He was a fantastic orator. He always spoke really passionately before a game, and he was always able to pinpoint areas at half time, how we were going and where we were going well, and areas we probably needed to pick up on. But he also knew who we could give a rocket to and who we couldn't, and who we needed to bunk up and try and get them to believe in themselves. And so words of encouragement for those types of players. So he never really castigated players in front of other players, only players he knew would respond. And that was Lee Matthews, which didn't happen that often, but whenever Yabby asked Lee for an effort, if we weren't going well, something always happened. He'd kick 5 goals in the quarter, or someone would go off on a stretcher. And the same with Dermott and same with Dipper. Those players, reacted in front of the other players, maybe asking them for a better effort, and they always responded. So he was a wonderful coach, and the players loved him.
Yeah, absolutely. He's revered as arguably one of the best, and I've heard some great stories about Jeansy. But we'll move on. The 1989 grand final. It's regarded by many as the greatest grand final of all time. What was it like playing in it? Was it as brutal as they all say it was?
Look, it was pretty tough. There's no doubt about it. I think I'd love the current MRP to actually watch that game back and see how many reports they make out of it. I reckon half of each team would have been suspended. So there was a lot going on off the ball and around the footy. And probably if Geelong had their time again, they probably went overboard in the first quarter at least. And, we got a lot of free kicks down the field and got goals from, undisciplined sort of acts, and with them going for the ball. And probably Buddha Hocking was one of the main offenders there in just being wound up to play in a grand final. And grand finals are about, real pressure at the footy, at that contest, keeping your eye on the footy and playing the footy. When you play the man, because you've got to understand umpires are trying to get control, knowing players are really wound up to win a grand final. So they try and get control early and pinpoint free kicks very quickly. And that's what happened with Geelong, and we ended up with something like 6 or 7 or 8 goals in the first quarter to their 2. And just, they played catch up for the rest of the day, even though they got within a kick. Catch up is always hard to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've rewatched that grand final a lot of times, and the brutality of that game is just something you just don't see these days. And you kind of wish that was back. That sort of brutality and the kinds of players that were playing in it. And just touching on that grand final as well, Gary Ablett, what was it like playing against him, and in particular on that day as well?
Well, he's such a brilliant player, like he was doing things, that you sort of, as an opposition player, you would shake your head and say, how do you do that? And in the end, he was a player that I was saying to myself, I wish he'd go off, or I wish he'd get injured. You wish on nobody, but he looked likely to be the one that nearly by himself that was going to cost us a grand final. But such was his performance, kicking 9 goals in just a magnificent performance. And look, you had to take your hat off to him. Winning the Norm Smith medal in a losing side is always very hard to do, especially. So you've got to put it in a special performance, and he did that and nearly got Geelong across the line, but thankfully he didn't.
A lot of people probably forget that Gary Ablett actually played with you guys at Hawthorn for, I think it was only maybe 6 games or so. I bet you were probably wishing he was on your side that day.
Yes, yeah. What could have been, hey? He just didn't cope with city life, and he just was a bit unreliable in turning up to training every now and then, which didn't please Allan Jeans, and he was moved on. But I think everybody knew, including Allan, how talented he was. But again, Allan wouldn't make special rules for one and not for others. So that was all a part of the mantra of buying into the club and being one team, and rules for one, other rules for everybody. But hindsight's a wonderful thing, and congratulate. I think he went away and played country footy for a couple of years, and then got the opportunity down Geelong, which is probably a good fit for him. He was able to live in a bit of property outside of Geelong and enjoy his footy down there and become one of the greats.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of great players, in your opinion, who do you think is the greatest? Like you play with a lot of great players, but who do you think is the greatest player that you played with in your career?
Look, there were so many. I played with Lee Matthews at the end of his career. You know, like I played with him 82, 83, 84, 85. He was getting on. He's 5'9", built like the old brick proverbial, and but he was playing basically full forward and kicking around 70 goals every year, even at that stage of his career. You know, 70, 60, 50, something like that, and you know, and having an impact as well every now and then when he'd go into the midfield. So I saw what a great champion he was, and you know, in his prime, how good he must have been to be able to play with as that midfielder bull who would win the footy and get the ball forward. But so I'd just say, you know, his influence was amazing, and playing with him, he didn't say much, but his actions spoke louder than words.
Your AFL, your playing career, I should say, VFL at the time, your playing career was obviously next to none. The accolades speak for themselves, but you did go on to do a fair bit in football after your playing career. I know you coached the Swans for a little bit and then even went on to be a recruiter for the Hawks, which is where my gripe with you comes in a little bit there, being a Richmond supporter. The year is 2004 and the Tigers passed on Buddy Franklin, and famously, thanks to your keen eye for talent, you did not. You also picked up Roughhead and Lewis in that same draft. Back then, did you, I mean, obviously you saw their talent, but did you predict they were going to become the players that they did?
Well, you can never really predict that because a lot of things happen, but you know, you look at the talent, you look in the crystal ball to a degree, and, you know, with both Roughhead and Franklin, you could see that, you know, they were going to have great frames. You know, we knew Buddy was super quick and very athletic, but what we didn't realise is he had such a big engine. You know, that was something that came out once he got to the club, and the, you know, sports science people sort of were testing him and looking at him, and they said, this guy's just an elite athlete. He's got a huge upside engine, which we never really saw. We didn't predict that he had that. We just saw he had athleticism and pace and was a very hard matchup. And your crystal ball would tell you that he'd put on a nice bit of size because of his body. He was a skinny little kid, and so was Ruffy. Both of them were going to become, you know, big brutes in, you know, 2 or 3, 4 years with the pre-seasons and weights under their belts. And Louis was a little bit chubby, and Buddy was a real footballer, and that's what I loved about him. He was tough. He carried a fair bit of weight as a junior, and he stripped that off and became super fit as well. And so, to the credit of 3 of them, they worked very hard. They dedicated themselves, and you know, they became really pivotal players for Hawthorn through that era.
I guess a bit like the kick in the prelim, and you say that, you know, you tell everybody that you would have had that shot from outside 50. It's the same with this. You can just tell everybody that you knew dead well that they were going to be the players that they turned out to be. Just claim it, I reckon.
Yeah, well, they had the talent. There's no doubt about that. The part that was great was the planning of it, you know, and how we would get the 2 key position players, you know, and that's where Intel can play a big part. And, you know, as I say to people, we knew if we took Franklin with the first pick, we wouldn't have got Roughhead because Richmond were going to take him. And so we swapped the picks and went for Roughhead with pick 2. And we had intel to say Richmond were a bit off Buddy in terms of wondering whether he was able to cope with the limelight of AFL, because he was a bit of a young lad. He was very lackadaisical and casual. In fact, at the draft camp down in Canberra, we were waiting for our Buddy to turn up to our interview, and he didn't turn up, you know, at the draft camp. And we went looking for him, and there he was laying on his bed with his feet up, watching TV. We said, you know, you're supposed to be in an interview with us, and it didn't bother him. Oh, am I? Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so we sort of heard that Richmond had gone slightly off him, and we took a punt that they'd go another way and we'd get Franklin. And that's what happened.
That is incredible. Geez, Quinn, that must hurt to hear.
Oh, it does. It does. I was obviously happy with Delidio, but choosing Tambling over Buddy Franklin definitely hurts looking back on their careers.
Well, yeah. Speaking of Buddy, do you think he did enough at Hawthorn to go down as a real great of the club, as in, like, you know, one of their top players in their history? I know obviously he moved on to Sydney and spent, you know, the back half of his career there, but do you think he was dominant enough at Hawthorn to put him right in that top bracket of players at the club?
Look, I think he helped set an era. Playing in that 2008 Premiership and losing to Sydney in the 2012 was probably, and then he went to Sydney in 2013. So it sort of, look, his whole career, he's one of the greats of the game. So you've got to say that, you know, Hawthorn was a big part of that. You know, he played in a Premiership. He hasn't played in a Premiership with the Swans, so he'll always be a Hawthorn Premiership player and regarded as one of the great players of the modern era. So I think, you know, he can look proudly back at his time at Hawthorn, and people at Hawthorn look proudly at his time and regard him, you know, as one of the, you know, great players that come through our club.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's no arguing with that. But continuing on with your post career and your time away from footy, you also went on to work for the Frankston Dolphins in the VFL. Tell us about your experience with them and working at a VFL club like the Dolphins. Yeah,
look, you know, they provided an opportunity. I'd sort of, you know, wasn't quite happy with the way things were in the AFL and the types of people coming into the industry, and so getting back to grassroots footy was really rewarding, and it's particularly trying to help a club that had a long history but financially were in real trouble and were likely to fold, and having a plan and helping them to re-get their licence back to play in the VFL again was really rewarding. And, you know, that I did that for about 2.5 years and helped them, you know, get back. Being a football all-rounder again was great, you know, because at that level, that's what you have to be. You have to be the cook and the bottle and the dishwasher as well. So, you know, basically you got to do everything. And it was an enjoyable, long hours, you know, and probably I wouldn't want to do that now, but I was happy to do it at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your thoughts on the VFL going forward? Obviously, with COVID and everything, it's really thrown a lot of it under question. Well, how do you see it going forward from here?
Well, ideally, I'd love to see, and I did an article in the Herald Sun going back probably 3 or 4 months ago about the second tier, because the problem I see for the kids in the talent pathway in Victoria, which provides around 50%, let's say, round figures of players drafted every year. The system is discriminating against the kids that don't get picked up or rookie listed, because they've then got to go to an AFL system that's, to me, broken. You've got AFL aligned clubs, AFL standalone clubs, and VFL standalone clubs. These kids come in and they can't get games because of so many AFL players, and the sides like Williamstown and Port Melbourne, which are standalone sides, have established lists, so these kids find it hard to break into them. And really the two teams like Coburg and Frankston, with quite weak lists, financially not very well off, you know, where the kids can get a game, but they're in a sides that you get beaten most weeks, which is not a great environment to develop your footy. Or they don't get a game and then they've got to go back and play local footy. which is tier 3 football. Whereas the kids in the Sandful and the Waffle play in clubs where if they don't get a game at Sandful senior level, they play reserves. And, that is a far better scenario. So I put a thing forward that we have a state league VFL competition with clubs in the country. And, we utilise our standalone sides and then have areas all around Victoria. And the AFL 10 teams should have their own reserves competition played as curtain raisers. And that way, the pathway for the kids coming out of the talent pathway as 18 and 19-year-olds gives them a far better opportunity to play in a proper state league competition.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think, having the pure reserves team for every AFL, Victorian AFL team would be great. And having those curtain raisers back would be awesome as well. So yeah, totally agree with that. But you did mention that you do some work with the Herald Sun as well and writing articles. And I did see you do a Carlton list analysis this morning, which I loved. And obviously being a Carlton fan, I love what you wrote about. And you've obviously been pretty bullish about the Blues as well. I've noticed in previous articles. So how do you see them going forward as well?
Look, I think they're building the right way, they've got some players now. It's time to add some. As I said in the article, I think the real area they need is to give Patrick Cripps a hand with a lot of the, with some decent big-bodied midfielders to help him out. Otherwise, Cripps will have a shorter career than he should have if he does, because he's just doing too much of that work without any support. He gets a bit of support, but not as much as he needs. And, if you look at the sides like Richmond, etc., they're big-bodied, Port Adelaide. Big-bodied midfielders are really important, like Cripps, but they need more of them. I think their list is building quite good. Adding Sard is a great opportunity, and Williams will add some quality and some pace into that midfield or off half back. Sard's such a damaging kick, to get the ball into that potentially good forward line that they have. So I think things are building the right way. Their defensive six is coming across nicely. Onwards and upwards, I think, for them, so long as they do the right things in list management and recruiting. Personally, I'm not sure that De Goey's the right fit for them. To me, it's buyer beware with Jordan. He's very inconsistent. He has a history of injuries. He's had a history of off-field incidents. And in a side like Carlton, you've got to be very careful in bringing the right types that are going to, knuckle down. And to me, he's just going for money, which is not the real reason to go. So if I was Carlton, I'd be saying, no, thank you. We'll just stick our course and go with Sard and Williams. And to me, I'd be looking at another inside mid-type player like a Luke Parker, etc. To see if he could get Sydney to let him go. That'd be what I'd be doing. We'll see what happens as this plays out. But I'd be a bit worried about, if I was Carlton supporter, about getting Jordan going. He can really play, no doubt about that. But is he going there for the right reasons?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I think I think the De Goey one's a bit. I don't think it's the direction Carlton really want to go. And I can't see it happening, especially being a Collingwood player as well. It would be an outrageous deal. But I think this is a massive off-season for the Blues. I've said it many times on the podcast. This is make or break. There's no excuse next season. They have to play finals. Yeah. Just sticking with the Herald Sun. How long have you been writing for the Herald Sun? And is that something that you're going to be continuing to do, over the next few years as well?
Yeah, look, I'm happy doing it, and they seem to be happy, getting me to do it. My analysis on the lists and also, my experience with recruiting and the draft. And I think I'm the only one that attempts a top 50 every year, which I've done. And, it's been interesting over the last 3 years. I think I've got 45 plus every year out of the top 50 drafted or rookied, and a lot of them too being mature age players. This draft will be a bit different with the list cuts. I think maybe clubs will look more at younger players and the mature age players because of list cuts. So it'll be interesting to see how it all pans out. But yeah, I'm enjoying keeping my hand in that side of it and footy, and the articles are going well online, and that's what will get me the gig again if they go well enough. So yeah, I've been enjoying it.
Obviously, this weekend is prelim final weekend, which in my view is one of the purest weeks of football you ever see. There's some 4 pretty talented sides going into this one, but who do you think will be the 2 teams playing off in the grand final this year, and who do you reckon is going to take it all?
Well, it's going to be really interesting. Will it be 2 interstate sides playing? Will it be 2 Melbourne-based sides playing? Will it be one of each? Fairly, Port have a great advantage playing on their home deck, and Brisbane do too. But given that, Geelong have always played pretty well at the Gabba, so hard to say. At this point in time, I'm thinking I'd love to see a Melbourne-based team and your Tigers in there, and I think they're heading the right way. But I think it's going to be one hell of a game on Friday. There was a lot of players missing that are playing this week from the Tigers' point of view from the last time they met. So I'm going to go for the Tigers to upset Port, and I'm going to go for Brisbane to upset Geelong. So I think it'll be a Richmond-Brisbane grand final. We'll see how I go. I might be totally wrong.
Fingers crossed you're on the money there. I'd love to see that. I would love to see that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's pretty much all we've got today, Gary. We really appreciate you coming on. We've both thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we really appreciate you coming on.
No worries, Marcus, and good on you, Quinn. I hope the podcasts go well.
Thank you very much, Gary. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Gary.
Good on you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.